Okay, once again, hello everyone, this is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroev. Today we have our next workshop. Uh, we rescheduled this, well, it's better to say we postponed this workshop from last Sunday because last Sunday I was quite busy with, that was my daughter's soccer match. She was playing in it was a final of her competition and her team won, so they became a champion. So it was a very important event and I had to participate, I had to attend and support her. That's why we actually rescheduled the workshop to today. So and well, this is our like Christmas or New Year workshop, so let's have some fun. Let's practice with tactics. And well, you know, there are many tactical motives that you learned, like attraction, distraction, double attack, discovered attack, pins, a lot of them. But it's quite often when you have to apply tactic based on the geometry of the board. What exactly I'm talking about? Let me actually explain, starting with this position. So look at this position, please, and tell me what you think. What black should play? Which geometry of the board I'm talking about? Well, with queen h4, you only exploit a pin. But you don't win the game. Brian wants to play rook g7 and rook g8. Well, rook g7 seems like a blunder, so if you want to double, you'd better start with rook g4, because g4 is a safe square. Rook g4... it was bishop g2. You mean bishop f2. Oh, this is what... Yeah, but then they take with the king. If they... No, wait. Then they take with a rook. So how does it work? You do this, they take here. Rook b1 here. Rook b1 works. Okay, so they have to take with the king then. And you still cannot capture on g3 because it's protected enough number of times. Okay, there is also a suggestion by Okhent. So Okhent, can you please specify what do you mean? So rook g3, yes, you can take, but they have enough defenders. What if they just capture with the d rook on g3? So what happens then? Okay, so actually, I like the idea of rook g4 with the plan to double, but it's a very, I mean, it's a longer way to win the game. Instead, you can play better. So what do you think? How does rook g3 work? It's actually a winning move, but after rook takes g3, what should you do? Then bishop f2. Still king f2. Doesn't help much. Okay, then here suggest rook g8. Yes, that's right, it's rook g8. Look at this. Very nice position. This is called the Maltese cross. The rook is pinned in two directions. There is nothing they can do to save on g3. The only logical move is to take on g8, but that means they lose a queen. and then the position falls. So it's at least it's queen and knight versus two rooks, but actually white loses much faster because their king is exposed. So, for example, knight f6, knight g4 can be the next move, so knight e4. You can take on f2 then, and so on. This is how the game ends. Yeah, so a lot is based on the geometry. You should realize which lines are important here. So, for example, in our case, the most important lines were this and the third rank. And the place of action or the key square is where these two lines are crossed. Fine. Let's discuss this position. What do you think? Well, it's like an ordinary queen's gambit. The c pawn was exchanged, so they transposed to the Carlsbad pawn structure, but b6 was played, so probably the bishop goes that way. Can you somehow take advantage of that? I think that the vast majority of chess players here would just castle, the game would continue with bishop b7, then black would try to get the control over the e4 square and maybe playing c5, undermining the center. But that was the last move. And by doing this move, black created a weakness in their camp and the tactical motive for a combination. That combination doesn't win the game, but definitely offers better chances to succeed. What exactly I'm talking about? Let's find it. Which lines are important for us? Once you figure out which lines, then you will find the place where these lines are crossed, and based on it, you can come up with the solution with the candidate move, which your task is to calculate. And that's it. Okay, knight f4 is interesting. So what's the purpose of knight f4? Are you attacking d5? It seems not. So what if I continue with bishop b7 then? Can we open our king side? Yes, we can. But what you are trying to do is just suggest a candidate move. What I instead want you to figure out is two lines that are crucial and that allow us to create potential threats and even win material. So which lines are important? Especially after b6 was played. So Brian said f3 as a candidate move. Well, maybe then you can castle to the queen side and play g4. That's a possible plan, but it doesn't win the game and doesn't provide you with a decisive advantage right away. In the long term, maybe some advantage. Dan, can you repeat, please? Or who wanted to say it? Oh. Okay. Brian wants to prepare e4. Okay, e4. Can you play e4 right away without any preparation? Okay, so according to what I see, your suggestion is to take advantage of the C file, so, and the 7th rank. And if so, the c7 becomes a key square. If so, your candidate move here can be rook c1. But how does it win? Also, Brian suggested to play e4 with f3. But maybe we don't have time. Look, b6 doesn't only weaken c6, it weakens the whole diagonal. And with these two pieces, we are targeting h7. We cannot take on h7 until we remove the knight. But if we play e4 right away, we do both. e5 becomes a threat, and even if they move the queen, e5 still works. So queen d8, e5, knight moves, bishop h7, at least you win a pawn. Maybe you win more than a pawn. So you also have more prospects for the attack in such a case. Same thing happens in case if they continue with knight to e8. How? If knight e8 is played, it's still the same, and then you win. Can they play queen h6? Actually, yes, they can. How should we continue in this position? G4 or H4? Well, actually, maybe just castle is okay. Castle, and then we play a 4 f5, and then we do a rook lift, and so on. Yeah, castle, thanks. Fine. What do they have to take? They have to take on e4. Yeah, that's right. So knight takes e4. This is a double attack. So they have to trade. If they don't trade, we still capture on f6 and win a pawn. So they have to trade, and this is a double attack, and we win at least a pawn on h7. So maybe it's not winning, but it's definitely a favorable position. So let's bring the... We are expanding our position too early, but there is no punishment. They cannot punish us for that. And on the next move, once we castle, we have extra pawn, and all we need is just to trade pieces and exploit extra pawn. We don't need to outplay our opponent anymore. The position already is almost winning for us. The rest is just yeah, the rest is just a pure technique. So we are expanding too slow, but we should take advantage of a tactical motive that occurred because of b6 played. Okay, e4 was the winning move. Well, let's continue with the next one. What about this position? So with the knight, we set a very nice blockade of the enemy pawns. Our bishop is good. The enemy bishop is bad. The other enemy bishop is restricted as well. Our king is exposed, but until we cover everything with our queen and knight and the rook, maybe, it's fine. So what would you suggest for white in this position? So you threaten the pawn. So a4, should they take or what? Maybe bishop c6? Bishop c6 you can still take. Yeah, a4 looks interesting. So take. Now let's do this. Take, knight takes, queen b7 to take on b4. Oh, queen b8. It doesn't matter actually. Oh, it's not bad. It's not bad, but I like the line John suggested with bishop g6, because bishop g6, if the king moves, we just win a pawn and then continue attacking e6, for example. If the rook takes, then they experience serious issues after queen h5. So king f7 is a must, otherwise they lose a rook. Of course, rook f1, and if the king moves away, we take it. But what about bishop f6? How should we deal with this move? What do you think? And after pawn takes f6, so rook takes f6, pawn takes f6. But then the enemy rook blocks on g7, so queen h7, rook g7. Right, you take g7. That's right. So if you capture with a pawn, it is a disaster. That's why what you have to do is to take with a rook. And then you attack this rook one more time, so they don't have any other option but to take, after which queen h7 is skewer. And the only thing they can do is to block, but after this sacrifice and win of a queen back, you have a completely winning position with two extra pawns. The bishop is hanging, so they don't even have time to capture on e5. So the bishop moves e6, and it's a technically winning position. So one pawn, the other pawn, and if the bishop moves, you also take on a6. Fine. So here bishop h5 was crucial, and these and these diagonals were important. That's why a lot was based on this pin on g6. Okay, let's move on. Let's find which lines are important in this position. It's white to move, so it seems that white pieces has more space. However, the material is equal. The rooks are about to get traded. We have a few checks like rook takes c8, for example, or knight h6. However, I don't know if knight h6 wins. So knight h6, pawn takes, queen takes, and what then? Maybe they just block with bishop f8 and bishop g7. Or maybe they play e5. So knight h6, take, queen takes, and then they play e5. This is how they block this diagonal. Okay, I think John is looking at the right direction. So if, let's say, knight e6, pawn takes e6, then queen c3. So both these diagonals, both these lines, this diagonal, I mean, and the c file are important. So queen c3. But the problem is this line, knight e6, rook c4, they don't have to take on e6 immediately. They can trade rooks first. Well, yeah, so let me explain. So if they take here, it works perfectly well because this move is a double attack and you take the rook with a check. So they cannot do anything. They can defend, maybe like that, or maybe with bishop f6. But then you take on c8 with a check, and then you also take on f6. So it's completely winning. However, what happens if they first take on c4? And if you take with a pawn back, they maybe take on b2 with a check or take on e6. What did you prepare for rook c4 in such a case? Yeah, bishop g7 makes more sense. So queen h6, I mean, if pawn takes knight h6. That makes sense too, actually. Okay, so let's discuss them both, starting with queen h6 first. So queen h6, a threat of delivering a checkmate. G takes h6 is a knight takes checkmate, for sure. So that's why this move is impossible. But let's first do rook c2, king goes to h3, and then bishop f6. Does it work? No. Knight takes with a check, and then the g7 becomes vulnerable. Okay, maybe I was wrong with this move. Let me make the moves on the board. So knight e6, rook takes, and queen h6. I think this is a must, but then he escapes. And how to defend? Because queen g7 is attacked 3 times. f6 fails, bishop f6 fails, bishop f8, but then knight f8. Oh, yeah, bishop f8. Yeah, bishop f8 works, actually, because bishop f8 hangs the queen, so you cannot take it because g takes h6. And then knight takes h6 is not a checkmate. Let me show you. The king escapes. Maybe after this move, white can play better. What do you think? Bishop g7 is a candidate. Bishop g7, f takes e6. Queen takes e6, king g7, but there are no pieces left to continue the attack. And f6 is protected by the knight, so there is no like that. No, that definitely doesn't work. So queen h6 was a nice idea, but it fails. Brian suggested bishop g7. Bishop g7, let's discuss it. So I'm sure they first deliver a check anyway. King moves to the safe place. Why I always deliver this check? Just to save the rook. And in this position, I wonder if, well, knight h6 is a checkmating threat. So what should be done? F takes e6. Knight h6 this time doesn't win the game. So queen h6. Yeah, queen h6 looks good, but too much material is already sacrificed. How do I want to simplify it? Knight f8. No, that looks unfavorable because there is this check, and after king f7, oh, maybe it works. King h7, bishop g7 blocks. Okay, but maybe there is a better move. Okay, let me just take the pawn. How does white win? Knight f6 doesn't work. What I think white should try is to move the bishop and threaten checkmate, but there is always bishop f8. No, bishop f8, queen g5. Ah, there is e5 move. And queen f7, which cements the position. So knight here, take. There is a threat. So queen f7, and if this move, I'm sure it's winning. Just queen g6. And then queen h5 if the queens are not exchanged. Okay, looks like queen h6 doesn't, bishop g7 doesn't work neither. But knight h6 works. How does it work? So if, let's say, king moves, then bishop g7 is checkmate. That's why after knight h6 they have to take it. So queen h6, threatening with checkmate. Rook c2, yes, but the king escapes. And now if they take any of these pieces, it's immediate checkmate. What do you think? Can black stop a checkmate? Bishop f6. Okay, does bishop f6 work? Yeah, so bishop f6 we can just take on f6 and continue with queen g7. Yeah, bishop f6 is only a temporary defense because after knight takes, so what, it's queen g7 anyway. So that's right. This is how the game was solved. So knight e6, this idea was based on the attack of the g7 and the attack of the rook on c8. And for this move, this intermediate move, white also prepared intermediate move knight h6. Let's continue. This is probably the most, well, this is my favorite example What can you say about this position? Walter John was playing against Alexander Alekhine. Which lines are important? Maybe it's not clear from this exact position, but let's try to make a few moves. Black has an attack. But how to realize this attack? How to take advantage of it? How to win material at least? If not checkmate. Okay, so Brian has a nice suggestion. We should distract the queen and play knight f2. Yeah, so if one of the knights capture on f2, it should be checkmate. Well, we can attack with knight f4 and then take on f2. So also, knight e4 is required to stop rook c7, otherwise it's a skewer and we'll lose a queen. The G file, okay, so the G file is important, and this diagonal, B2, no, and this diagonal. Well, so what does it mean? It means that you should base your tactical combination on the G3 square, but how? So I don't think it's this move. It seems knight e4 is the most natural move to play. So knight e4. What happens if they play queen e1? They didn't, but what happens if they play queen e1? How should we continue? Why I said queen e1? Because the queen should, well, either they sacrifice exchange and then maybe take on f4, or they have to move the queen. But if they move their queen, they lose on f2, and it's almost checkmate. I think it's checkmate. So let's say queen e1, defending f2. Is c2 hanging? Okay, so your suggestion is to capture on c2. Queen c2, rook f4. You take with what? With a pawn, but then they play bishop f4. And what I don't like about that, well, they have a bishop pair. However, they also threaten to play rook c1. And rook c1 becomes deadly, not only because of the queen on c2, but because the king cannot escape to b8. Let me show you this. So rook e4, pawn takes e4, bishop f4, threatening with rook c1. And according to what I see, it's losing. You can try to take there, maybe, but still, check, king d7, and at the very least, queen e4, bearing this threat. I don't even think that queen f3 was such a big threat. I think here, white is winning. So, no, queen c2 isn't the best option. Okay, instead of queen c2, Johnny suggests f5 to reinforce the knight's position. Well, it does make sense. If rook f4, f takes e4, while your queen is here, you defend on f4, so it's not a big issue. Well. Yeah, queen g7, we will discuss it. So f5, I think f5 is a nice move. How can they continue? Maybe, Johnny, maybe you lost the momentum of the attack, but I like the move. So f3, no, there is a very unpleasant knight g3, forcing the king to go to this diagonal. Yeah, f4 and you may continue the attack. Maybe they play c4. What about rook f3, by the way? Where does this knight go? A bit unclear. Okay, fine. So, fine, f5 may work. So Samir suggested queen to g7. Yes, and Isabella also suggested queen g7. Fine. So what can you say about this move? So what do you think? Should they play rook g3 and stop it? Take. And then how do we have to play? So the black knight on f4 hanging? So what should black do then? Knight e2. Then I don't understand the point of knight e2 move. So knight e2, bishop e2, or queen e2. No, there is a pawn on g3. Okay, so Brian suggests e5 in the initial positions. Okay, we will discuss it a little later. F4 knight is hanging and the e6 pawn is hanging, right? So rook g3, knight g3, f takes g3, and these are hanging. So if the knight moves, e6 is hanging. White will be down exchange, but maybe because of two bishops and that they capture the pawn on e6, they may have a sufficient compensation. Not sure actually, but you can find a very nice move for black in that position after you took the rook on g3 and white reacted with pawn takes g3. You may pawn to e5 because the knight on e4 is only hanging because the bishop attacks it. The g pawn not. So rook g3, knight g3, f takes, and you have a5, and yes, it's a winning position. If they take, it's a checkmate on g1. If they take with the bishop, it's just a trade, and this allows you to add extra pressure. Well, queen e6, yes, but what do they achieve with such a move? King b8 just. And there is still a pressure on g3. Fine, so it seems that rook g3 isn't the best way to play, but after queen g7, there is a way for white to save the game. Not only to save the game even, but to have some advantage. Yes, it's rook c3 check. How does it work? So now, if the king goes to b8, the bishop captures on f4 with a check, and then you can block this attack. If the king goes to d7, then bishop b5, and the king has to go to a dark square. If king there, it's rook c7, and you win the queen. If king there, it's bishop f4, and then bishop g3, so you defend using the you blocking the g file. So if king b8, it's still bishop f4. So what else? What else here? Yeah, nothing else. Knight c3. Yeah, there is knight c3, of course. But anyway, so if king d7, you play bishop b5. King e7, you trade queens off, and then you capture on e4. So you have a rook and two bishops for two rooks. Most likely white is winning. Fine. So this bishop f4 and then bishop g3 works. And in this scenario that I mentioned before, so the king cannot go there, it's bishop here. So king goes to e7. Let's trade queens. I'm just... Oh, no, no, no. Let's not trade queens. Let's win the rook. But even if the queens are exchanged, it's completely winning. Fine. So, queen e1. That's why queen g7 doesn't work well. So it seems to me that Brian suggested e5. Brian, in this position. Why not? Okay, so how does e5 help to defend? It supports on f. Yeah, so moving... ah. So, and then you threaten with this move. That makes sense. Let me see what they can play. Okay, so probably this is still the best way for them to play. And then bishop f4, so pawn takes f4, queen e4. And there is some compensation, but definitely it's not sufficient. Black is winning here. Yeah, e5 is a nice attempt. Yes, I agree. However, the best is just h4, covering this and preparing queen g7. Yes, yes, I know. Okay, so that tells us that rook e4 should be played. So pawn takes f4. What else? Then they take here. And this is where, when Alexander Alekhine played knight e4 and started this combination, he noticed, he realized the importance of certain lines, and his next move allows him to take advantage on... so how to explain it? It allows him to take advantage of the tactical motive that occurred because of there are some crossed lines weakened. Okay, Brian suggests e5. I don't like this move because with queen f5 they gain a tempo and they can continue with defensive strategy. So, because e5, if they take, maybe it works. But if they deliver queen e5, queen f5 check, king moves, then what? Let's say bishop here. Actually, again, I'm not pretty sure it's the best option. Okay, let's discuss it because maybe I'm mistaken. Without queens on the board, I think white can successfully play with a bishop pair. So queen f5, queen d7, I think they take, and this is no longer favorable. So you don't have rook d1 because of bishop b2. And if you take, well, they play bishop c4. No, they play bishop e3 or b2. b2, then bishop c4. I think they are completely fine. Because even if you do so, rook d2, and if this, oh, maybe rook, okay, rook d8. So this rook d8. Well, okay, take. So bishop e6 is a threat. This is very likely it's losing. Possible. Yes, this is a more solid move. So queen d7 doesn't work. Maybe instead queen b8 works. King b8, sorry. Let me see. So queen g7 is still a threat. Bishop c4. And now queen g7. Take, take. And there is still checkmate, right? How to stop it? You can stop it. Yeah, bishop g5. If the queens are exchanged, I think it's fine. So take d5. And this is what white can play for a draw. Yeah, actually, if you ask the engine, it's zeros, so it's drawish. Taking with the pawn maybe is better? No, I don't think so. No, this is definitely drawish. Okay, yeah, bishop g5 works. Nice. Maybe we don't have to hang the rook and we can play this move first. No, this is a blunder. So rook g7. Well, maybe, but rook g7, then there is no threat of doubling, so they can just take, play bishop e3 and defend everything successfully. No, actually, e5 definitely isn't the best strategy. Okay, so your turn. Please keep thinking if you need time. Okay, queen c6 is a candidate move with the idea of pushing. Well, they can block it with bishop e3. You think bishop g2? But then I just didn't calculate it, so I don't know if it's a good idea. So rook, then push. Maybe not, maybe it doesn't win. But just bishop e3 allows me to stop any activity of queen c6. So, well, stop thinking about the concrete move. What I ask you to realize which lines, files, ranks, or diagonals are important. Isabella thinks the G file. Okay, anybody else? Two long diagonals. Almost. We need here the, yeah. So this diagonal and this diagonal. Because, yeah, so John's suggestion is absolutely correct. Because the queen can reach to e1. Queen c3, threatening the rook. If they lose this rook, it's over. 2 extra exchange guarantees a winning position. There is no attack that white can initiate with 2 bishops. So they have to make a rook move. Rook b1. But if so, it's this, and they cannot protect on f1. And if they unpin, they lose a rook. So bishop a3, queen takes. There is no way to defend. King h2, still queen f1. What would you suggest? Is the game over, or white can try something else to at least to try to save the game? Maybe white has a last chance. Let's look for it. Right. So queen c7, queen b8 is very likely to work too. Queen b8, king d7, queen b7, and then queen a6 to defend. Yes, queen c7 works better because it provides black with no other option but to take, then bishop f4 and e5. They win the queen back but lose the bishop. Rook f4, and after f3, Alexander Alekhine successfully realized his advantage. He has extra exchange, there is one pawn as a compensation, so it's not clear that black is winning, but black definitely has advantage and he realized it. The key idea for you was to notice the importance of these two diagonals and the fact that the rook can be attacked with queen c3. And then after queen e1, they cannot move the bishop to unpin. Yeah, they can, but I think it's a more losing position than than that endgame without exchange. Yeah, that's right. Fine. Okay, perfect. So once again, let's do a quick summary. So rook c3 is a threat. We also need to attack f2, so that's the reason why this move was played. And it seems that they have to take, because after queen e1 and, for example, h4 or even something else than h4, we have a strong attack, and our plan is to attack through the g file. That's why they're forced to take. And this is how white thought that they can trade their rook for 2 knights. But Alexander Alekhine realized that due to this move, he can attack and move the queen to e1, and white cannot unpin because the rook is not protected. Now, in order to not lose the game immediately after queen f1, they sacrificed their queen, delivered the check, took the queen, but lost their bishop, and the position was absolutely losing. So white lost the game later. Fine. This is our next example. So black to move. f4 was recently played. However, the bishop is under attack, and if the bishop goes back to e7, it seems white is completely fine. Well, I'm absolutely sure you realize that this diagonal is important. What else is important here? Which intersection we should be looking for? Can you specify which exact line you suggest in this variation? Once again, so this, rook c1, knight c1, and then how does it work? So if queen takes, then the rook on a3 is absolutely lost. But if queen a3, then what? Rook d1. So what happens then? The king moves. Okay, we will discuss this line with king f2 a little later. So why not bishop a4 directly? In this exact position, you suggest bishop a4. Think it fails. What if they take on c5? Okay. Bishop a4, they take on c5, you take the queen, they take the queen. You're down a piece. Also, so queen a3 line still works. You probably wanted to play this move, but then queen here. Let me see if it's the best option. No, actually, bishop b4 is a good suggestion here. So yeah, I have to take on c5. This is the only way for white to play. Okay, so what did we came up? We should play bishop e3. Wait a sec. Just once again. So queen. And then you win exchange? Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's sufficient. So it's some advantage, but the pawn on c6 is a problem. This is a problem. So let's say bishop a4, I play b4 and then transfer the knight there. Okay, so bishop a4 right away. Is there anything else? No, I think b takes c5 is the best move. I like the Samir's variation. I'm looking at bishop b5 instead. Brian, bishop b5 doesn't work. They attack your queen. You cannot do anything. Maybe you're talking about bishop b5 in a different position. Okay, so bishop e3. Rook takes e3 is a must. And bishop a4. In this position. Okay, that makes a difference. However, I'm not sure if it works. So let's say they trade. I think you have to take on c8. Well, it's hanging. So king f2. It's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad because, well, you cannot, you can play this and try to do that, but they play so. If your rook was already in the enemy camp, it would work better. But without that, you cannot go neither here nor there. So without any help of the rook, it's not winning. So bishop a4 here. So they cannot take because d8 is protected by the queen, and if that happens, you take with the you take the queen, and this is winning because there is also queen d1 at the very end, winning this. So that's why queen a3. So queen a4, for example, fails. Queen here, then rook there. There is nothing to discuss. So queen a3 is the only move. Rook c1, knight c1, and rook d1. Fine. And king f2. And how to play. Queen takes a4. So rook takes c1, queen takes a4. The queen is here. This is what was played in the game, and the game continued with knight e2, and white almost equalized, but then made a significant mistake. We can go over it. So rook d2. Well, how do you want to save the bishop? Please specify. You want to save it right away? Oh. Yeah, but I don't think they allow you to play such a move. Maybe queen c3 just. There is no threat on the back rank. e7, but then g4. Bishop takes d5. You probably mean that there is rook f1 move, but I don't think rook f1 is promising because this is sufficiently protected by the queen. And if pawn takes, let's say I can trade queens off. Oh, no, I cannot, actually. No, this is a threat. No, there is a back rank. Sorry. Okay, actually, there is a back rank even in this position. Why nobody told me about that? Yeah, so knight d5 fails. When the knight is here or there, it's still okay, but once it goes away, then nobody covers the back rank. Okay, so rook d2 was played in the game. Then the game continued with knight e2, bishop b5. What? Right? Bishop b5? Actually, it's not. And after bishop b5, and it's the same against bishop d1, white has a move that allows them to almost equalize. What move? They missed it, and they lost the game quickly. So the guy who invented win gambit in Scandinavian. So bishop f1. No, bishop f1 allows knight e7 because this time you can attack the rook from two sides, f5 and d5. That's why g4 doesn't stop it. This is what was played in the game, and it loses the game immediately. So how does bishop f3 loses the game? I'm sure it's on the surface. Rook d3, right? Yeah, so So this is what happened in the game, and white resigned. But they should play what Johnny suggests, king e1 to unpin. So what? The rook has to move. Same thing if bishop d1. So rook takes. Queen g1. If what? If king goes there, it's this and then this. So that's why bishop should block. Oh, let me show you. So it's a winning position after queen g2. If that's why bishop f1, bishop e2 anyway, because it's a pin, the king takes, then queen h2, and the king goes to f3. And this is where white survives. Black has problems too. So a7 is hanging, the back rank is weak. I know there is no mate, but the knight doesn't participate in the attack in such a case. And that's why the queen alone cannot do much. Okay, so king e1 could work, but that tells us that rook d2 is not the best move. What move was the best, actually? Okay, queen d4 is an attempt. Well, I don't fully understand what you threatened, so can I take? Oh, no, I understand now. Okay, queen knight e2 first. Then you have to retreat to d7 to not lose the bishop. And then I doubt that... But then you lose your bishop. So queen d4, knight e2. So rook d2 is a blunder. Queen d7 is okay move, but why black is better here? It's not clear. What else do you suggest? Queen d2 in which scenario? Queen d4, knight e2, then queen d2. So you threaten with this, but is it a threat? So what about this? So queen e1, king here. Then what? No, it doesn't work. I don't think this is a good move. So queen, okay. So how does it work? Okay, well, I'm sure you calculated this. Because rook c1 and white has to take on a4. Otherwise, they are pieced down. Rook c1, queen a4. There is no back rank issue because the knight is on g6. And then rook c4. You win the pawn on b4 and keep pressuring the b pawn. So that would offer a better position for black. Not winning, but definitely with better chances. Because this pawn dies. What do they have to unpin? So like king e2 maybe. King e2, maybe. Well, no. Maybe they have to play bishop f4 move. No, that's a blunder. So it's hard to make a good move. Okay, Okay. This? What for? I don't think it's a good move. Oh, well, let me see. What should I do? So take. You want to play queen h1. Okay. Well, I think it still fails, but okay. We'll see. Okay, so what can I do? Queen. No, queen c3 doesn't work. Oh, let me try. No, let me try queen c3. So bishop g2, king g2. There is no pin. You can deliver a check that way, but I think I'm fine with queen h3. Well, black has some initiative, but nothing serious. Well, and what do you assume I capture? No, I won't. So what can I do? Let me trade pieces. I can try rook d3 or queen c2 first. Let me try queen c2 first. So the knight is hanging. Well, then knight b3, knight d3. What is better? Knight d3 probably. Does queen g2 work? Wait, why isn't show me? Okay. So my mouse just stopped working. Queen f1. Can I play queen g2? So what then? Yeah, approximately. I think black is still a little better. Okay, so bishop c6, no. What you should try instead? Rook c1? Yeah, yeah. No, let me show first, and then I'll give you time to think. So rook c1, queen a4, and rook c4. So, and then it's hard to make moves because, well, queen e8 makes no sense. So something like that, probably. But I think it fails. Yeah, rook c2, right. Okay. Yeah, rook c2, and then king f3, queen b7. So this fails. That's why it's hard to defend. I think this is winning for black. Okay, so you can think what white should do in this position, what black should do in this position instead of taking on c1, because taking on c1, in my opinion, is the best move. Any suggestions? Okay. Right. Right. So I think it's the best. So, but actually, doing this check was already a mistake. It was better for black to continue with knight e7 and with the threat of knight f5, of course. If so, this, and then the rook comes to the c2 square. So they can play king f2 and they cannot take our bishop on a4 because the queen has to defend on a3. So they can play king f2 or they can start with knight e2, doesn't matter. We reach this position and then it's hard to get rid of both pins. It's difficult to suggest a move, and rook e2 is a threat, so queen d4 can be played on the next move. Knight d5 is a problem already. For example, if you play bishop f3 in this position, there will be knight d5. Oops. So they take, but you already take on e2 and it's game over. Fine. So in this position, it was important to realize that this bishop a4 and the activity along the d file is crucial. Okay, so we have one more example to continue with. This one. However, before we continue with this example, let me remind you that the workshops are free. However, if you would like to support this, if you like this content and you would like to support me, you can always send a donation. So you can do it either on PayPal or through Wise, for example, using this link. Let me copy it in the chat. And explain how it works. So you click on this button, then a pop-up window appears. You can enter the amount you want to donate. It can be any amount. And then you click this PayPal button, which redirects you to your PayPal account. The other option is to use Wise. So just go through this. Okay. Just use this link. And then we will continue with our last example. Okay, please take a look at this position. Well, the black king is locked in the center by his own pieces, and white decided to play for a pin on the h file. So they played rook h5. Well, the idea of such a move was to take advantage of the intersection of the back rank and the h file. So once the bishop moves, for example, bishop takes queen, rook h8 leads to checkmate, which I think is quite obvious. Yeah, queen g8, rook g8 mate. So what do you think? What did white miss in this situation? How does bishop g4 works? Bishop g4. So the idea was to let the king to escape, I think. but I'm not sure if it works. King d7. So let's say this move. At the very least. Right, so what? King c7. At least I can take and no. I do this first. 95 back. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so what else I have? Rook c2. Yeah, maybe knight d7 is the best move for me. Knight d5, king b7. Maybe that is the best scenario. Then I just take on e3. Okay, so yeah, some advantage. Right, what else can it be? Rook h6 doesn't work. Can't I just do what? Knight f5 is a candidate move. What about knight f5? Yeah, knight f5 seems to work. And if my next move is knight c7, the king doesn't escape. Bishop takes, bishop takes f5. Bishop takes f5, so pawn takes, right? Or what? Or rook h6. No, rook h6 always fails. So then what? Knight c7, I don't think it works. So knight c7, king f8. I think this is fine. This, king d7, and what? Knight e3 probably. This is enough because how do you play? You move the king to the c file, but if you do so, I play rook c2 and take your rook anyway. And then white has too much material. So bishop g4 fails actually. What else? Okay, Johnny suggests rook g8. So yes, it's rook g8. How does rook g8 works? This move creates a threat of the back rank. How does it work? So, for example, rook h6 is a disaster. If rook h6, it's simply queen g1, and then a quick checkmate, because the enemy king is also vulnerable to a back rank mate. If, what else? F4 doesn't help, it's the same. Well, rook d1, then the queen just lost. So queen d3 is the only way to continue. Because now queen g1 means what? Rook d1. And what do you think about that? So, yes, rook d1 and then rook c1. This is how it works. So, the c file and the first rank, rook takes, and this is x-ray. So, queen takes c1 with a checkmate. This is how the game ended. Well, fine. Let's go back. So here, once rook h5 was played, rook g8 allows us to unpin and at the same time take the c1 square under the control. So the intersection of the first rank and the c-file was crucial, and Igor Bondarevsky found it in his game against Isaac Boleslavsky. And it's hard to suggest a move because bishop h6 does a skewer, so nothing works. Neither f3, neither f4, nor anything else. So, for example, if f4 is played, it's queen g1, the same move. Queen g1, rook g1, and that's it. Okay, fine. So I hope you enjoyed today's tactical workshop. Do you have any questions? On Monday, which is tomorrow, I'm going to send you the recording of this workshop if you want, as well as I will upload PGNs of the games that we analyzed on chess.com, on my chess blog there. Okay, so yeah, thank you for coming. Let's do the next workshop next Sunday. So happy New Year to everyone, and see you on Sunday.